How do you distinguish irrational states? What rational criterion would you apply to irrational claims in order to separate them into pre-rational claims, bad, and trans-rational claims, good? In order to accept Ken Wilber's totally irrational integral theory, you need to be able to play this bizarre game of recognizing what irrational claims are worse than rationalism, and what irrational claims are better than rationalism. Of course, to a rationalist, all irrational claims are equally bad. Absolutely no irrational claim can ever defeat rationalism. Wikipedia says, Wilber believes that many claims about non-rational states make a mistake he calls the pre/trans fallacy. According to Wilber, the non-rational stages of consciousness, what Wilber calls pre-rational and trans-rational stages, can be easily confused with one another. In Wilber's view, one can reduce trans-rational spiritual realization to pre-rational regression, or one can elevate pre-rational states to the trans-rational domain. The real fallacy is that there is any difference between pre-rational and trans-rational thinking. Both are exactly the same thing: irrationalism, thought contrary to reason, logic and ontological mathematics. There is no higher level of irrationalism, no transcendent irrationalism. There's just irrationalism. The irrationalist who believes in Allah is no more irrational than the irrationalist who believes in Buddhist non-dualism. Both types are totally irrational, looking for an irrational answer to existence, and explicitly attacking reason and logic. They claim that reason and logic are wrong and that something else, which is ipso facto irrational and illogical, is the right answer. It's not right. It's as fucking wrong as wrong can be. What possible tool could you use to distinguish the pre-rational from the trans-rational, given that both reject rationalism, hence both are equal species of irrationalism? In the absence of reason and logic, there is no conceivable means to distinguish between different flavors of irrationalism. In truth, they are all the same flavor. Irrationalism only comes in a single flavor, the plain wrong variety. Anyone in any way attracted to Wilber's ideas is ipso facto irrational. To actually believe that rationalism can be transcended and bettered by irrationalism is demented, and exactly the sort of irrationalism that all mystics, emotionalists and believers who hate reason and logic are drawn to. Reason is the devil's whore. Right, guys? To believe in the trans-rational, and this is very much a question of faith, denotes that you think there is something superior to reason and logic. Right there, you have proved how irrational and illogical you are, and how resistant you are to accepting ontological mathematics, the zenith of rationalism, as the single, absolute, objective truth of existence. It's reason and logic that transcend everything. Nothing transcends reason and logic. It's irrational and illogical to imagine otherwise. The way human reality works is that people move from primitive irrationalism based on animism, to more sophisticated irrationalism based on theology, to the first glimmers of rationalism with the start of philosophy, to more sophisticated conceptual rationalism with higher philosophy, to sensory empiricism, science, allied with mathematical rationalism, finally culminating with pure, analytic mathematics, ontological mathematics, the acme of rationalism, predicated on the PSR and Occam's razor. The task is to reach the zenith of rationalism, not to migrate from irrationalism to rationalism and then to retreat from rationalism to create a supposed higher irrationalism, as Wilber advocates. When you overshoot rationalism, you are not progressing, you are regressing. You are actually returning to the earlier primitive state, the pre-rational state. Humanity's problem is that it refuses to accept the rational truth. It prefers anything else. Having failed with the pre-rational, it consequently embraces the post-rational, which it idiotically calls the trans-rational. You can't transcend rationalism. All you have done is returned to irrationalism, but dressed it in more pretentious clothes and fancier, more up-to-date lingo. The task is to know where to stop, and that's at ultimate rationalism, the PSR. In Hegel's terms, it's the absolute idea. For Plato, it's the form of the good. To the irrationalists, reality needs a different ending. The emotionalists want love and light, unconditional love, pure love as the last song of the universe. The believers want their God, their perfect, all-powerful being, in whom they place all their faith, their cosmic daddy, their protector, their king, their Messiah, their Savior, their Lord and Master, their dominant who makes them obey his every command, like the good little submissives they are. The sensing types want to see the Big Bang, even though there was nothing to see at the actual event. It was a set of pure mathematical operations and there were no eyes there to observe it. The mystics? Well, they want to be absorbed into bare awareness, or cosmic consciousness, or the oneness, or nirvana, or non-dualism, or whatever else they want to label it. What these people have in common is that they are all empiricists, which means they are all opposed to rationalism. For these people, concrete experiences, whether emotions, perceptions or intuitions, are real, while rationalism, conceptualism, mathematics, is unreal. In fact, reality is made of reason and logic, as ontological mathematics. Reason and logic furnish the intelligible syntax, form and structure of reality, which is what actually explains reality. Reason and logic are accompanied by semantic, empirical experiences, which furnish all the color of reality. Semantics is the ontological information conveyed by syntax, the information carrier. Is the point of existence to have ultimate understanding of existence or ultimate experience of existence? Well, in fact, you cannot reach the ultimate experience unless you work out what the ultimate syntax is that carries the ultimate experience. The ultimate syntax is zero entropy. You cannot reach the state that the empiricists want to reach in the absence of absolute knowledge of existence. The rationalists are right. It's all about knowledge, not about experience. Knowledge allows us to have the peak experiences which people crave. Irrationalists don't have a clue. They have divorced semantics, content, from syntax, form, when in fact it's the syntax that drives the semantics. The logical positivist Rudolf Carnap said, of the so-called philosophical problems, the only questions which have any meaning are those of the logic of science. To share this view is to substitute logical syntax for philosophy. In fact, it's mathematical syntax that determines the whole of philosophy, all knowledge, and everything required to reach the absolute answer to existence. Only with absolute knowledge can absolute experience be attained. Syntax is always more fundamental than semantics. Rationalism determines empiricism. Form decides content. Form contains content. There can be no semantic information without the syntactic information carrier. The hilarious thing about Wilber's implementation of spiral dynamics is that he is personally revolted by reason and logic, and refuses to accept that reason and logic are the answer to existence, even though they must be by way of the PSR and Occam's razor, so he just invented the idea of the trans-rational, so that he could point his idiot followers to where he himself wanted to end up, Buddhist non-dualism, his personal faith position. Listen, folks, the fact that a mystical guru claims that there is a level of irrationalism that follows rather than precedes rationalism doesn't make it so. It's just another example of irrationalism to believe that it does. Rationalism is the end of the line. Full stop. That means mathematics, as the complete expression of rationalism, is the final means to understand reality. Mathematics is reality's own code, not the man-made code of all gurus, prophets and true believers. There is no spiral, with levels below and above rationalism. Rather, there is irrationalism that expresses itself in different ways, mostly exemplified by mainstream religion, and some philosophies, and then there is rationalism, which also expresses itself in various ways. The lowest form of rationalism is science. Strictly speaking, science does not belong to rationalism at all, it's empiricism, and is just another kind of speculative religion or philosophy. What elevates it above that status is one thing only, its use of rationalist mathematics. Science has no explanation for why a subject based on empiricism cannot do without mathematical rationalism. Science regards mathematics as an unreal abstraction. Conceptual, rationalist philosophies, such as those of Pythagoras, Plato, Descartes, Leibniz and Hegel, have a much better idea of reality than science, but they fail to be optimized through not being expressed mathematically. Ontological mathematics rectifies this problem. It applies mathematics to conceptual philosophy. In doing so, it allows conceptual philosophy to replace science, which is a drastically anti-intellectual subject, enthralled to the limited, fallible, unreliable, delusional human senses. No intellectual would ever privilege the senses over reason and logic. Forget the spiral. Replace it with a different image, a ladder. The lowest levels of the ladder are the different modes of religious irrationalism. These give way to less irrational philosophies. These in turn give way to science, i.e. rationalism qualified by sensory empiricism. Science finally gives way to mathematical rationalism, firstly abstract rationalism, abstract mathematics, and then concrete rationalism, ontological mathematics. That's the end of the line, when it is realized that reality is concrete reason and logic, but with an experiential, empirical aspect. If we want, we can easily retain the spiral, but radically reorganize it. In our new spiral evolutionary system, humanity goes from primitive irrationalism, simple religion, to first-level rationalism, conceptual philosophy, to empirical rationalism, mathematical science, conditioned by sensory observations. Then the spiral enters a second tier, which repeats the first tier, but at a higher level. So, in the second tier, what Wilber calls the trans-rational is just the pre-rational, but presented with more pretentious and inauthentic arguments, cherry-picking from science and philosophy, but radically distorting these. We can compare this to what Oswald Spengler called the second religiousness. Spengler said, "Every great culture begins with a mighty theme that rises out of the pre-urban countryside, is carried through in the cities of art and intellect and closes with a finale of materialism in the world cities." But even these last chords are strictly in the key of the whole. There are Chinese, Indian, classical, Arabian, Western materialisms, and each is nothing but the original stock of myth shapes, cleared of the elements of experience and contemplative vision and viewed mechanistically. The belief is belief in force and matter, even if the words used be God and world, providence and man. Unique and self-contained is the Faustian materialism, in the narrower sense of the word. In it the technical outlook upon the world reached fulfillment. The whole world a dynamic system, exact, mathematically disposed, capable down to its first causes of being experimentally probed and numerically fixed so that man can dominate it. This is what distinguishes our particular return to nature from all others. That knowledge is virtue Confucius also believed, and Buddha, and Socrates, but knowledge is power is a phrase that possesses meaning only within the European-American civilization. The destiny element is mechanized as evolution, development, progress, and put into the center of the system. The will is an albumin process, and all these doctrines of monism, Darwinism, positivism and whatnot are elevated into the fitness moral, which is the beacon of American businessmen, British politicians and German progress philistines alike, and turns out, in the last analysis, to be nothing but an intellectualist caricature of the old justification by faith, the next phase I call the second religiousness. It appears in all civilizations as soon as they have fully formed themselves as such and are beginning to pass, slowly and imperceptibly, into the non-historical state in which time periods cease to mean anything. So far as the Western civilization is concerned, therefore, we are still many generations short of that point. The second religiousness is the necessary counterpart of Caesarism, which is the final political constitution of late civilization. The material of the second religiousness is simply that of the first, genuine, young religiousness, only otherwise experienced and expressed. It starts with rationalism's fading out in helplessness, then the forms of the springtime become visible and finally the whole world of the primitive religion, which had receded before the grand forms of the early faith, returns to the foreground, powerful, in the guise of the popular syncretism that is to be found in every culture at this phase. The Wilberian trans-rational does not transcend rationalism. Rather, it resurrects and echoes the pre-rational. It becomes popular because of the ugliness, nihilism and sterility of scientific materialism and empiricism, which is wholly unable to feed the human soul. People feel that they need a solution, and the trans-rational is the new irrationalist absurdity they manufacture, resurrecting primitive Buddhist mysticism and trying to dress it up as something compatible with cutting-edge quantum physics and the highest philosophy. In truth, it's just old-style Buddhist superstitious nonsense, thousands of years old, being sold by charlatans as a 21st century solution. As if. But a 21st century solution does exist. It's hyper-rationalist ontological mathematics, the complete idealist and rationalist solution for scientific materialism and empiricism. So, the spiral concludes not with Buddhist non-dualism as New Age guru Ken Wilber ridiculously claims, but with state-of-the-art rationalism, ontological mathematics, the culmination of reason and logic. This is the absolute, the omega point, where the developmental spiral concludes. It's game over. We have delivered the definitive, absolute answer, and it's none other than what it was always going to be, the principle of sufficient reason, the absolute idea, the rational and logical explanation of everything. Ontological mathematics provides us with the quantitative, intelligible syntax of reality, the information carrier, and the semantic experience that accompanies it, the information carried. It is thus a dual-aspect monism providing both the syntax, rational aspect, of existence, and the semantics, empirical aspect. This is how rationalism and empiricism are reconciled. Pre and trans. Sometimes the pre/trans fallacy is cast in terms of pre-conventionalism, conventionalism and post-conventionalism. Are you following the game? Are you deconstructing the ideas? Do you see what terms are being privileged? The task of the Wilberites is to link rational with conventional in order to associate rationalism with the staid, the sterile, the limited, the lacking. The word trans, by contrast, is to be fetishized as a means of escaping the conventional, the rational. In fact, it's exactly rationalism, hyperrationalism, aka ontological mathematics, that allows us to transcend the human condition and access the divine order by giving us the foundational knowledge of existence, and thus the means to control it. Our instruments are our own minds, our mathematical monads, our eternal souls, the supreme agents of rationalism.